today our recommendation, I'm going to recommend everyone start reading A Will Eternal. A Will Eternal is the 4th novel from Ergen. Of course, he's done a few others. He stopped one midway through because another one was taken off. But you should all know of I Shall Seal the Heavens, and you should have also seen the updates for Renegade Immortal, which are both also his stories. So we're going to go over a quick synopsis from Wuxia World, and we're going to also read the first chapter together. That'll be fun, and I'll give you my thoughts on the story so far without spoilers. And yeah, please go follow Deathblade over at Deathblade ISSTH. That's on Twitter at Deathblade ISSTH. He's also got a YouTube page. If you go to this YouTube page, you'll see it under the front page under Friends. Go ahead and give him a subscribe too, because he puts out a lot of cool stuff about like translation, about pronunciation of the words. I've learned so much from following him, especially the other people like Little Shanks at Valere. Follow those guys too. Of course, Ren Waxing. So first up, I'm going to give you a disclaimer because I grew up in North Carolina. I lived in California for 7 years now. I am not from China in any sense of the word. I am not a fluent Mandarin speaker. I have not taken classes to speak Mandarin. So I'm about as like blue collar as they come when it comes to this stuff. I will try to research as much as I can to get the names right, to have the correct pronunciation for the names. But there will be times where I don't, and I just hope that you'll forgive me. I'm doing this because I love the content. It's in no way meant to be disrespectful in any way, shape, or form. So just bear with me on that if I do, but I will get better with time, I promise you. So the synopsis from Wuxia World for A Will Eternal is, it is the 4th novel from Ergen. It tells the tale of Bai Xiaochun, an endearing but exasperating, you can say that again, a young man who is driven primarily by his fear of death and desire to live forever. Hey, who isn't? But who deeply values friendship and family. The story takes place in the same universe as Ergen's other novels, but it is a separate story and can be read alone without the previous knowledge. It's much more comedic and lighthearted than his previous works, although it has its fair share of action and drama. The names from the first chapter, I got pronunciation help thanks to Deathblade, of course. I have the pronunciation video that he put out there for the first names in the story in the description, so go ahead and click on that if you want to watch that. The 2 names that we're working with in the story is Bai Xiaochun, as well as, let's see here, Li Qingho. So those are the 2 names that we'll be going through as we read this. So I hope you enjoy this reading. This is the first chapter of A Will Eternal, and afterwards we'll talk about my thoughts on the story so far and why I think it's something that you guys should be reading. So let's go ahead and throw some music on and get through this. Woo! Mount Hood lay in the Eastwood mountain range, and at its base was a quaint little village. The villagers there lived off the land and didn't have much to do with the outside world. Currently, it was dawn, and the villagers were congregated at the village gate to see off a young man of 15 or 16 years of age. He seemed thin and weak, but had a healthy, fair complexion and an overall charming appearance. He wore an ordinary green robe and had apparently been washed so many times it was nearly worn through. Something about the way he was dressed, plus the innocent look in his eyes, made him seem exceptionally quick-witted. His name was Bai Xiaochun. "Dear elders and fellow villagers," he said, "I'm on my way to learn about immortal cultivation. I shall miss all of you." The young man wore a slightly pained expression, as if he couldn't bear to part with his fellow villagers. This made him look even more charming than before. The surrounding villagers exchanged glances, shrugged helplessly, and then pretended to look even more reluctant to see him leave. A white-haired old man stepped out from the crowd and said, "Xiaochun, ever since your dad and mom left us, oh so long ago, you have been..." He paused for a moment. "Such a good kid." Seeing that Bai Xiaochun hadn't left yet, he continued, "Don't tell me you're not interested in living forever. All you have to do is become an immortal, and then you can live forever. It's a really, really long time. Well, it's time for you to leave now. Even a baby eagle must learn to fly eventually. No matter what situations you run into out there, you have to hang in there and keep moving forward. Once you leave the village, you can't come back, because your path will always lie ahead, not behind." The old man patted Bai Xiaochun kindly on the shoulder. "Live forever," Bai Xiaochun murmured. A tremor ran through him, and a look of determination slowly filled his eyes. Under the encouraging gazes of the old man and the other villagers, he nodded his head seriously and looked around at everyone one last time. Finally, he turned and walked away from the village. As he disappeared off into the distance, the villagers started to look more and more excited. Their forlorn expressions turned to those of joy, and the kind-faced old man began to tremble. Cheers! Tears even streamed down his face. Justice from the heavens! The weasel is finally gone! Who was it that told him they saw an immortal in the area? Whoever it was, I'm going to give you a huge reward on behalf of the village. The village was soon echoing with cries of rejoicing. Some people even took out gongs and drums and began beating them excitedly. The weasel is gone, someone said. But oh, my poor chickens. He ate the roosters crowing at dawn, so he somehow got all the kids in the village to eat every chicken we had. Today is the beginning of a new era. By this point, Bai Zhaochun was fairly close to the village still and could actually hear the sounds of gongs and drums. He even caught wind of some of the cries of excitement. He stopped in his tracks, a strange expression on his face. After a moment, he cleared his throat and proceeded on his way. Accompanied by the faint sounds of rejoicing, he began to make his way towards Mount Hood. Mount Hood wasn't a very tall mountain, but it was covered with thick vegetation. Therefore, despite the fact that it was dawn, beneath the trees it was dark and quiet. Double Dog told me that he was hunting some wild pigs a days ago and saw an immortal flying around. Bai Zhaochun proceeded along, heart thumping. Suddenly, a rustling sound could be heard from the nearby shrubs. It almost sounded like a wild pig, and it immediately caused Bai Zhaochun to grow extremely nervous. The hair on the back of his neck stood up straight, and he asked, Who is it? Who's there? He quickly pulled out 4 axes and 6 machetes out of his travel pack. But that in and of itself didn't make him feel much safer, so he also produced a bit of black incense from within his robe, which he clutched tightly with his left hand. Don't come out! He shouted, trembling. Don't even think about coming out! I've got axes and machetes, and this incense can call lightning from the heavens and even summon immortals! If you dare to show your face, you're dead! Finally, he turned and ran towards the mountain path, simultaneously juggling all of the various weapons in his hands. Clanking sounds could eventually be heard as axes and machetes began to fall to the ground left and right. Perhaps whatever it was that had been there, rustling around in the shrubbery, really did end up getting frightened by him. The sound ceased, and no wild animal burst out of the bushes. Bai Zhaochun hurried up the mountain, swiping the sweat from his brow. By this point, his face was pale, and he was almost considering giving up this crazy idea of climbing the mountain. But then he thought about the incense stick, which his parents had handed down to him before they died. Supposedly, it had been passed down from their ancestors, a gift bestowed by a down-and-out immortal they had saved. Before departing, the immortal had given it to them to pay back the kindness they had shown. Furthermore, the immortal had even promised to take a member of the Bai clan as a disciple. He told them that merely burning the incense stick would summon him to their side. Bai Zhaochun had actually lit the incense stick more than 10 times in the past few years, and yet no immortal had ever shown up. It eventually reached the point that Bai Zhaochun was starting to suspect whether or not the story about the immortal was even true. Finally, he resolved to climb the mountain. For one thing, the incense stick was almost used up, and also, there was the matter of the flying immortal being sighted recently. And that was how he ended up in his current situation. His theory was that if he could get a bit closer to the immortal, then perhaps it would be easier for that immortal to sense the incense stick. Standing in front of the mountain, he hesitated for a moment, then gritted his teeth and decided to keep going. Thankfully, the mountain wasn't very high, and it didn't take long to reach the peak, where he stopped, panting. He looked down at the village below, an emotional expression appeared on his face. Then he glanced at the fingernail-sized bit of black incense. It had clearly been burned on numerous occasions, and was almost completely used up. It's been 3 years. Bless me, Mom and Dad. It has to work this time! Bai Zhaochun took a deep breath, and then carefully lit the incense. A stiff breeze instantly kicked up, and in the blink of an eye, dark clouds filled the sky, lightning crackled, and deafening thunder boomed in his ears. The majesty of the entire scene caused Bai Zhaochun to tremble, fearful that he might be killed by the lightning. He nearly spit on the incense to extinguish it, but managed to hold back. I've lit this incense 12 times in the past 3 years, and this is the 13th time. I have to let it burn. Come on, Zhaochun! The lightning won't kill you. At least, probably not. All 12 times that he lit the incense in the past, there had been lightning and thunder, and yet no immortal had ever appeared. Each time he had gotten so scared that he spit on the incense to put it out. He actually found it a bit strange that a supposedly immortal stick of incense could be extinguished with some ordinary saliva. Xiaochen sat there shaking in fear as the thunder boomed around him. Suddenly, a streak of light appeared off in the air in the distance. It was a middle-aged man wearing luxurious clothing. He had the demeanor of a transcendent being, yet he looked weary and travel-worn. In fact, if you looked closely, his eyes seemed to flicker with extreme exhaustion. Finally, I can see exactly what moron has been lighting the incense stick all the time for the past 3 years. Every time the man thought about what he had experienced during the past few years, he got extremely annoyed. 3 years ago, he had sensed the medicinal aura of an incense stick he had given away back when he was in the key condensation stage. That immediately caused him to recall the debt he owed back in the mortal world. The first time he flew out in response to the incense stick being lit, he had assumed it would be a simple matter of heading out and then immediately returning. He had never imagined that before even being able to find the incense, its aura would suddenly vanish, severing his connection to it. If it had happened only once, it wouldn't have been a big deal. However, over the course of 3 years, the aura had appeared more than 10 times. Over and over again, his search was interrupted, ensuring that he was constantly leaving his sect and then going back and forth, back and forth. It was torment. As he closed in on Mount Hood, he caught sight of Bai Xiaochen. Fuming with numerous frustrations, the man landed on the mountaintop and waved his hand, instantly extinguishing the sputtering incense stick. The thunder ceased, and Bai Xiaochen stared at the man in shock. "Are you an immortal?" Bai Xiaochen asked cautiously. Still unsure about what exactly was going on, he slipped his hand behind his back and grabbed an axe. "You may call me Ling Qingho. Are you from the Bai clan?" The middle-aged cultivator's eyes shone like lightning as he measured up Bai Xiaochen. Ignoring the axe behind his back, to him, Bai Xiaochen seemed delicate, almost pretty. It reminded him of his old friend from years ago. Furthermore, his Latin talent seemed suitable. Li Qingho's anger gradually began to fade. Bai Xiaochen blinked a few times, though he was still a bit scared. He sat up straight and quietly said, "Junior most definitely is from the Bai clan. I'm Bai Xiaochen." "All right, well, tell me this," Li Qingho said, his voice cool. "Why did you light that incense stick so many times over the past 3 years?" He very much wanted to know the answer to this question. As soon as Bai Xiaochen heard the question, his mind spun as he tried to come up with a good answer. Finally, a melancholic expression appeared on his face, and he looked down towards the village at the bottom of the mountain. "Junior is a sentimental and righteous person," he said. "I simply couldn't bear to part with my fellow villagers. Every time I lit the incense, I was overwhelmed with feelings of sorrow. The mere thought of leaving them behind was far too painful." Li Qingho stared in shock. He had never considered such a possibility, and as such, the anger in his heart faded even more. He could tell from this young man's words alone that he was definitely good material. However, the next thing he did was send his divine sense down towards the village, and he heard the sounds of drums and gongs and rejoicing. He even heard the villagers talking about how glad they were that the weasel was gone. An unsightly expression appeared on his face, and he felt a headache coming on. He looked back at the charming and pure Bai Xiaochen, who seemed like he wouldn't hurt a fly, and suddenly realized that this kid was a villain to the core. "Tell me the truth," Li Qingho said, his voice echoing like thunder. Bai Xiaochen was so frightened that he started shaking. "Hey, you can't blame me," Bai Xiaochen said, sounding very miserable. "What kind of crappy incense is this anyway? Every time I lit it, lightning would start crashing around everywhere. I almost got killed on several occasions. In fact, avoiding that lightning 13 times over was quite a feat." Li Qingho looked silently at Bai Xiaochen. "If you were scared, then why did you light it over 10 times? "'Cause I'm scared of dying," Bai Xiaochen replied indignantly. "Isn't the point of being an immortal cultivator to be able to live forever? I want to live forever." Li Qingho was once again struck speechless. However, he found the kid's fascination with living forever laudable. He realized that his personality might change a bit after some hard training in the sect. After a moment of thought, he waved his sleeve, sweeping Bai Xiaochen up into a beam of light that shot off into the distance. "All right, come with me," he said. "Where are we going?" asked Bai Xiaochen, suddenly realizing that they were flying. "Oh, we're so high!" The ground was very, very far down, causing the blood to drain from his face. He immediately dropped his axe and grabbed onto the immortal's leg. Li Qingho looked down at him, clutching his leg, feeling a bit at a loss. He replied, "The Spirit Stream sect." And that is Chapter 1. There were little flubs in there, but you know, hope you guys enjoyed it. It's a really cool way to open the story, and it really explains very well the kind of character that we're dealing with in the main protagonist, or in the story by Xianxia. He's a complete trickster. He's very manipulative. He will obviously use whatever means necessary to get what he wants in terms of playing with people's emotions and playing with, you know, how they perceive him. And unfortunately, that goes his way a lot of times, maybe fortunately, and a lot of times it tends to not. But in the end, as luck seems to always be on the main character's side, it ends up working out, if not in comedic ways and unexpected ways. This novel is really enjoyable. It's about 560 chapters in right now on the translation, and I'm really enjoying it. Not often do you read something that's like funny, but also enough to keep you entertained and keep you, you know, captivated. And Ergen's doing a really good job with A Will Eternal to do that. And the translation is done really well. Deathblade does a great job on keeping the tone the same, keeping the expressions the same within the stories. This is a really good one that'll get you laughing. Like, honestly, you'll be reading this and just chuckling to yourself constantly. Deals with a lot of funny stuff surrounding alchemy. If you were to think of what is the weirdest thing that could come from swallowing a medicinal pill in one of these stories, it definitely has several arcs that deal with that, but it does it in a constructive way where, let's say there's a pill that makes you have to go to the bathroom a bunch. Like, this is just right off the top of my head. It would create a storyline that has that within it as kind of a joke, but then it would also use it in a way like later in the story when you least expect it, where if that's the only thing he's got on him, he'll try to use it in a situation to help save his ass in that situation. So it's smart with its writing. It's smart with its comedy where it doesn't leave things left behind. Sometimes you read these stories and they'll like introduce something that doesn't really work at that moment, but then like 500 chapters later, you're thinking, wait, but he has that. Why isn't he using that? That would just do everything for him right now. Why doesn't he have that? This doesn't do that. It remembers every situation. It remembers all these crazy little story intricacies with Xiaochen and all the characters from within the sects that he goes into, and all these fights and all this cool stuff. But it also deals with really dark, gritty stuff. A lot of it has to deal with like soul refining. A lot of it has to deal with like on some level torture, on some level some really graphic descriptions of things happening, but it always has that underlying comedy element that makes it lighthearted enough that you don't feel like you're reading a light novel about Berserk. You know, like Berserk's awesome, don't get me wrong, but it's really dark. This is dark at times, but the comedy is really there because the character just brings it in so wholeheartedly. I just really enjoyed it so far. Please let me know what you think of that story. If you're reading it, let me know, because I'm totally caught up on it. I'm actually paying to see early release chapters, so I can talk about that if you guys are paying too and you like don't have anyone to talk about who's doing the Patreon thing. But yeah, let me know what you think. Definitely one to check out, one to read for sure. If you're looking for something like you're caught up on it and you haven't read I Shall Seal the Heavens, that's a crazy one. I'm really excited. They're going to release an entirely edited translation of it in a full novel form, which is going to be really cool. I'm so glad that's happening. I'm going to have to reread it because a lot of these stories have aspects of them that, you know, combine with the other stories that Ergen's written. So like there's lots of references to Renegade Immortal in I Shall Seal the Heavens, and there's not so many references to the other books in A Will Eternal yet, but this is kind of like a big news topic that Deathblade told me, which is really cool. Obviously, A Will Eternal is in the same written universe as Renegade Immortal and I Shall Seal the Heavens. But what I was told is that there's actually a very on-the-nose and substantial piece of evidence in a epilogue of A Will Eternal. So this story is already over in China, and they